Hello, everybody, and welcome. For those of you who have been following along with my channel, um, you've realized that it's been a while since I posted a video. It's actually been 66 days since I posted the last video. And the reason why I took a break is in total, it's been 665 days since I gained full spectrum consciousness. And over the last almost 2 years, as you keep rising to a higher level of consciousness, embracing your spirit, start living through your spirit instead of living through what your subconscious mind, paints as our illusion. It's felt as if I've been, drunk within spirit. As I traveled around the world and met with different people from totally different cultures and spoke about consciousness, about embracing ourself and rising to our higher self, you start recognizing synchronicities within everybody in the world. And then it's a matter of, okay, once you rise to higher self, a higher way of thinking or being, being conscious within spirit, it's important to also reel back in our physical mind. And there is such a thing as getting too far down the spiritual rabbit hole, if you will, to where you start losing touch with, physical reality. And you have to find a balance between the two in order to be successful in life, or in order to be able to even communicate effectively with the people around us. Now, if you're not familiar with what full spectrum consciousness is, it's a state of being where we're able to respond to life situations with an inner calm, without fear or anxiety, negative emotions. And this gives us the ability to embrace our shame that we've been carrying, the guilt, and the fear. And it allows us to rise to a higher level of love, peace, so that we can further gain enlightenment. Now, science will tell you full spectrum consciousness is one category, and then super conscious mind is another category. To myself personally, a super conscious mind is when you start gaining consciousness within your spirit, when you truly embrace who you are and start living through a different realm, if you will. Now, the level of consciousness, the being conscious within spirit is a level of consciousness that is above the subconscious and conscious mind, able to acquire knowledge through our non-physical means and pass it on to the physical mind. This shows us the underlying unity of all things and can provide solutions for the problems by seeing that the problem and the solution are as one. Now, how does this apply to life? Well, once you become conscious within spirit, you're able to start seeing all different perspectives simultaneously, allowing us to be empathetic with other people's perceptions. It is important for us to first step back and recognize that our subconscious mind controls 95% of our life experience. The majority of our decisions we make, the actions we take, our emotions and behaviors depend on 95% of our brain that lies beyond our conscious awareness. Now, the subconscious mind is always awake. Once you wake up, once you, connect with your inner spirit, you start realizing that even when you're sleeping, you're still aware. You're still conscious within your being. You can feel your physical body resting, but you're still aware of your surrounding, you're still aware of your thought patterns, and you still gain to, obtain more spiritual wisdom. Also, the subconscious is based off habits, the neural pathways. The more we use a neural pathway, the more prominent it becomes, and the more it becomes a habit. Um, the subconscious mind also takes everything as literal. If you look at the divisions between the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain and the functions, it becomes more and more obvious how the left side of our brain is directly tied within our subconscious, because that's where our methodical thought patterns come from. And it's also, the subconscious acts like a computer process, because what the subconscious is doing is using our ancestral memory all the way back to the beginning of our ancestors, and it's carried on through life experiences, protecting from danger, to the point where our brain, subconscious mind, becomes so programmed that as we experience life within reality, it projects a different illusion than what other people will see. So, what is my, purpose with this video? Well, because of not posting any videos in a while, I've received a lot of questions, and it's just, all I want to do is try to help other people wake up within spirit. Through all of my channel, what I've learned is that all of us are desiring to connect with our inner spirit. And over the last 2 years, I've learned how. Now, I do speak, about biblical wisdom, and it's not because I'm trying to persuade one person or another to see things from my perspective. That's not my goal at all. My only goal is to try to get everybody to wake up and recognize their spirit within, and start empowering your inner spirit to subdue your subconscious and your physical mind, so that we can all start living reality on reality's terms. And I know that the absolute best way of gaining that wisdom is by listening to the exact words that Son of Man spoke, because he is truly telling us how to connect with our spiritual self, and in essence, connect to the spiritual realm. Please allow me to start with this question first, as far as why focus mainly on biblical wisdom and experiences when others have possessed them, offered from an alternative perspective. Because honestly, I think this question kind of opens up doorways within the mind to understand why consciousness works the way it does, and why the history of religions add up the way they do. Myself personally, I was brought up in a Catholic, German Catholic style family, where I did the traditional Catholic, experience, CCD and stuff like that. And I even remembered as a young boy that when I was in Mass, it felt ritualistic. And I remember feeling as if it didn't feel loving and welcoming. It felt more dark. And not to get into, a lot of that history, but after I was in the Marine Corps, I started taking a different perspective. I started seeing things as the universe. Everything's tied together, everything's one. The universe provides, and I'd been fortunate enough in my life where many a times, I'd be the guy that would fall into a pile of poop and come out the other side, better off. And the more I heard people talking about religion, and specifically Christianity, the more it turned me off, because I always felt as if people were saying it as a defense. They were, expressing their Christianity as a defense to why they're better than somebody else is. Because I also found that with my experience, that religious people tend to be the most judgmental of other people, which to me felt incredibly hypocritical. To represent yourself as a righteous person, or even trying to be righteous, but yet not listening to the exact words that are being spoken. But for me, since I've been able to study with theologists since, within all religions since the beginning of human existence, I've noticed that each religion is missing, a piece. It seems like no religion actually figures it out. Like the messages are never, clearly transferred. At one point in my life, I had had a tarot card reading done. And the interesting thing was, all of it ended up coming out to be true about 10 years later. So, progressing on in life and raising my daughters and, living life, seeing the reality of life, seeing the reality of how we treat each other, it made me realize that there's a disconnect between all of us that somehow is getting missed. I believe that within every single religion, there's absolute truth. And what do I mean by absolute truth? Well, absolute truth is when everybody can agree upon it. Everybody can find common ground. And the only way you don't, the only way you can truly find absolute truth is if you don't challenge someone's belief system. And in order to be able to get your point across to everybody, the only way you can transfer a message or, give a message to somebody is from a neutral perspective. Because if you're neutral, you're not likely to trigger anybody's, defensive mechanisms. So I finally got to the point to where I realized I needed to, read the Bibles for myself. And it was actually only about 9 months ago. And about 11 months ago now. And what I ended up realizing is majority of religion is giving their own perspective, their own perception of what the truth is, instead of trying to teach all of us to literally listen to the words of Son of Man specifically, because that's where the absolute truth is. And even in his own words, he warns us against the scribes and the religious leaders, to the extent of calling them brood of vipers. Now, that doesn't really, answer the question. Why go ahead and focus mainly on biblical, wisdom and experience? I believe that the biblical wisdom from the New Testament is the answer on how we tie all of us together, how we all find, common ground, how we're all able to connect with our inner spirit and become more conscious. And when I refer to become more conscious, to me, consciousness is when you truly begin to connect with yourself, connect with your inner spirit, that one half of your inner monologue. And when you connect with that spirit, you're able to kind of see life from all perspectives, instead of just your individual perception that we tend to be living off our subconscious memory. Now, I know that sounds really deep, and it is. But we're starting to see all over the world that people are waking up. People are gaining a higher level of consciousness. Therefore, how do we figure out a way to bring us all together if we don't know what the common ground is, don't know what the, true spiritual message is? And the way we find the true spiritual message is by getting everybody to first recognize that we have a spirit within. I mean, even science proves that we have a spirit within, they just don't recognize it. Everybody knows that when your energy leaves your body instantly starts decomposing. So if we look from I noticed that you had mentioned more of a wonders of the trees, wild animals, and taking in, forgive me, if I refer to this wrong, but taking in life from a Mother Earth perspective, homeopathic perspective, and the history of that belief system is in the foundation of all religions if you look at it from a spiritual perspective. I mean, I've studied paganism, I've studied high ritual magic, I've studied from all the different occult perspectives, numerology, astrology, and I haven't gotten into obsessing on what they're trying to achieve or attempting to see if they work. I've studied them to look at, okay, what is the commonality? What is the commonality between all religions? And the truth is, it comes down to spirit. If we all recognize that all historical, religious doctrines are giving us our spiritual message, then we can all see that, hey, in essence, everybody is right. Everybody has truth within their own perceptions, because their perceptions are based off their subconscious and their life experience. So everybody has the right to have their own perception, and if we can all respect each other's perception, then we can all understand how to find the common ground, if you will. So this brings up spirit versus the subconscious mind. Now, Sigmund Freud called the subconscious mind the unconscious mind, and said that it is part of the mind that is never accessible to our awareness. So in other words, we could never be conscious within the subconscious, or in essence, we don't have a spirit. Now, why would he say that? Well, if we take into account that Sigmund identified himself as an atheist, but yet he was brought up as a Jew. So this brings up a question of, does the spirit only exist in the physical life, or does the spirit live on after physical life? Or if our spirit lives on beyond physical death, don't all negative experiences then become positive, because the result is that we recognize the spiritual wisdom that we gain? This brings us to the choice of whether or not we accept that spirit truly exists, or are we going to take the atheistic perspective? Now, with spirit, we can recognize that there is an existence beyond physical death, and everything has a purpose, versus an atheistic perspective believes that physical death is the end of our existence with no purpose to life. Now, if we recognize that through spirit, we're simultaneously living a spiritual life along with the physical life, and we have the ability to know without actually needing to observe. In other words, we don't have to have physical evidence right in front of us to know what the truth is. Kind of like conscience, but we'll get to conscience later. And then we also, through spirit, recognize that there are no coincidences because it actually was observed. Now, from an atheistic perspective, you would not believe in consciousness because there is no meaning to life and there is no actual existence beyond your physical life. Therefore, why would you be accessing another realm if it's non-observable? Atheism is based basically off the need for scientific observation in order for anything to exist. If God, the analogy of if God exists, then show it to me, prove it to me, show me something that can prove that God exists. Some do believe in the concept of energy, but they do not believe it comes from a divine deity. Now, they do believe that God does not exist and reject the belief that physical beings can have supernatural abilities or supernatural powers. The interesting part is, though, where the tie between the two is if an atheist can recognize the potential of spirit or the potential of energy, but does not feel that, there is God as a deity, as a physical being, well, that actually coincides with what Jesus, said in the New Testament, because, for example, John 4:24, Jesus clearly states that God is spirit, that God does not take on physical form. So there are linears in between the spiritual perspective or recognizing the spirit and an atheistic perspective. There's absolute truth within both of them, and what it all ends up coming down to is spirit versus energy. And the truth is, we're just splitting hairs there. It's all a matter of, what we're calling it, but able still to recognize. Now, the, very strong atheistic perspective that just believes there's no meaning to life, that there's no purpose, that when we physically die, that's the end of our existence. I get that. I respect that. That's referred to as being spiritually dead in spirit. And the New Testament actually even talks about being dead within spirit. We all have a choice. We can choose to believe in our higher self, and we can have a desire to reach a spiritual realm. Ultimately, it's a matter of recognizing spirit. So if we accept that simply that spirit exists and the possibility that there is life beyond our physical life, that we continue on in a spiritual realm, then we have to look at, okay, what resources teach us how to gain spiritual wisdom? Now we can go from a occult perspective, high ritual magic, astrology, numerology, or we can take the religious perspective, looking at the Bibles, the Old Testament, the New Testament. We can go back and read the Torah. We can look into the Kalabah. We even have access to what's called Strong's Coordinates, which is basically numerology of the Old Testament. All of them, if you look at the foundation within religion, all of them are trying to work us towards the same conclusion, and that is our connection within spirit, to recognize the spirit within us. For example, high ritual magic considers the New Testament one of the absolute best books of magic, because it teaches you how to clearly center. It teaches you how to clearly connect to spirit. Now, the difference between doing it from a magic perspective versus doing it from a spiritual perspective by listening to the words, say, of Son of Man in the New Testament, is two simple approaches. It's just how far one is going to get you compared to the other. For example, if you're going to go the occult path, or you're going to go ancient religions or even new wave religions, we have to ask ourselves, what is the final reward that we will receive if we truly are able to reach our highest level within that spiritual realm. Black magic says that, or excuse me, magic in general, not just black magic. And the difference between black and white magic is, black magic is if you're doing it for selfish intent, like casting spells on people to harm or whatever. White magic would be compared, really close to the works that Jesus did. The only difference is recognizing that it all came from the Holy Spirit versus, from a magical perspective, seeing it as you're empowering yourself instead of the power coming from the Spirit. Now, in order to gain the spiritual wisdom, we have to live reality on reality's terms. We can't keep lying to ourselves. It's one thing for other people to lie to us, but the absolute most devastating thing that can happen within our existence is to lie to ourselves. And all the negative memories within our mind, if you work through them and work all the way back to the foundation, you will find that it comes from us truly feeling sorry for ourselves. And the reason why we're feeling sorry for ourselves is because our belief system has been threatened, to where the mind and the subconscious start questioning everything. And since it can't find the answer because it's not attached to the spirit, it gets defensive and it gets insecure because it doesn't know what to do. Now, if we refuse to accept the negative within life experience, then we're able to find all the positive that exists in reality. The example of a glass half full, half empty. We all have the ability to choose which way we want to perceive it. Therefore, we can perceive and recognize all the positive results that came from any one experience. So if we have accepted that spirit exists and recognize it, and we decide that we're ready to start gaining spiritual wisdom, then we already recognize that we can go from an occult perspective, or we can go from a religious perspective, looking at the historical doctrines that we have. Now, on one hand, we have our individual mind that is based on the subconscious memory. This is the negative first perspective trying to protect us. This is all the historical instincts, if you will, that have been carried on from generation to generation to generation, and it can be linked back scientifically to be found within our DNA. Now, our individual one-sided perception literally becomes our own self-created illusion through our subconscious mind. Basically, our mind, for example, a color. The reason why a color is called that is because somebody taught you that. Instinctually, if nobody had ever taught you that, you wouldn't know what it is. But you also, without anybody teaching it, that it's wrong to kill. So you have that instinct, but it didn't come from your subconscious. This is the point that we go from instinct, the protective mode, to actually recognizing the positive that comes from the spirit. Our spirit within is the source of all things that are good. If you were to look up into the Bibles and look up traits of the Holy Spirit, you're going to see that every single one of them is good. Or if you were to From a magic perspective, if you were to look up traits of dark magic versus light magic, you're going to see light magic is all things that are good for everybody. It just doesn't recognize the highest echelon, if you will, of becoming spiritual. Now, we could turn to religious leaders, that teach their perception of the spiritual message instead of actually teaching us how to decide what the message is telling us. Because the only way we can find absolute truth within a spiritual message is when it runs through us and we process it through our subconscious and our physical mind, and then allow our inner spirit to speak to us to tell us the absolute truths. Then we also have people who influence our lives by teaching guilt, fear, and judgment. The problem that we have had with people trying to gain spiritual wisdom or move to a higher level of consciousness, if you will, is the way we're going about teaching it. We're teaching it based off of guilt. We're teaching it based off of fear of what happened if we don't, recognize God or recognize spirit, or the fear of how we're going to be judged from what we've done up to this point. And that's a very scary, thing to think about, and for your subconscious to try to process, because it can't come up with an answer. Your subconscious is not spirit. It doesn't recognize spirit. Its place is to protect you until you gain enough spiritual wisdom to actually wake up within your spirit, hence consciousness. Through the history of mankind, we have been so busy concentrating on what isn't the truth, constantly trying to say, no, I believe this compared to that, instead of actually stopping and saying, hey, what if there is absolute truth within everybody's perception? And so if we're looking at gaining spiritual wisdom, wanting to connect with our inner self, wanting to rise to our higher self in hopes and in belief that there is a spiritual life that continues on after our physical death. Well, if we stop and think, there's only one person who had absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose, that gave up his physical life to teach us how to connect with spirit, how to become one with spirit, so that we can rise to our highest level and continue on into an afterlife after physical, life. Now, this is also the one person that has warned us about the deceit of religion and has warned us that our mind is working against our spirit. So we have to step back and realize, instead of, okay, why would we believe, the words of Jesus or Son of Man, because that's all he called himself, versus why not? Now, if you read the words of Son of Man, he said absolutely nothing wrong. He truly said nothing that any quality human being that even has the slightest bit of consciousness within spirit would disagree with. So the question is, why would we not do exactly what he says to do exactly what his example was, so that we could reach our highest level of consciousness within the spirit? Everybody wants to battle, well, Jesus is God or this or that. First off, Jesus clearly states that God is spirit, and then you have to recognize the Trinity. If you truly look at the Trinity, you realize everything is the Holy Spirit. And through the New Testament and back in the Old Testament, it talks very clearly about the Spirit taking control of a body, or the Spirit giving visions, and so on. It's not saying from a physical perspective, it's clearly trying to relate to us that the spirit can take control of our body. And if you truly listen to the words of Son of Man, we realize that he is teaching us how to subdue our physical mind and recognize our subconscious so that we can start living within the presence of our spirit, living within our spirit. Now, when we live within our spirit, we're able to distinguish the difference between what the physical mind is perceiving everything through the lens of the subconscious that comes from ancestral memory. And then it takes us to a higher echelon, because if we're able to recognize that this illusion that is produced by our subconscious, mind on how we perceive everything, if we can recognize that and then also recognize the other perceptions simultaneously from a neutral perspective, then we truly start to see through the spirit, which is in essence reality on reality's terms that everybody can agree with. For example, sitting here, if all of a sudden a pine cone fell on my head, absolute truth would be for everybody in existence that saw it take place that a pine cone landed on my head. So there's no reason to disagree with it. And we can accept the fact that there are no other perceptions of that specific statement that a pine cone, hit my head. So if we can accept that all absolute truth comes full circle around spirit, and it is inspired by the same inner source within all of us, which is the desire to gain spiritual wisdom, then it comes to the point where we must ask, why is this not just another perception? Well, the reason is because any conscious person can see the same perspective moving forward. And any conscious person recognizes other people's perception because it's their perception, and to them it's a truth. And a conscious person understands that the only way we move past this, the only way we can connect as one, is we look forward and we find the common ground that all of us can believe in, and the common ground that all of us have within inside us. Now, it also comes down to, why are we not looking for what does not align? In essence, the negative first perspective, viewing it from the subconscious mind, instead of actually finding the synchronicities between all perceptions. Because this is how we rise to a higher level of consciousness. This is how we find the absolute truth from, that rises us above past religious teachings that have created such a great division amongst all of us. Because the truth is, we do have the ability to all connect. We do have the fundamentals of what a quality human being is, and if we can recognize those fundamental qualities and pull together and put all of our strength and energy into those qualities, then we can remove all the negative from this world. If we accept Son of Man's words as the purest source of wisdom and the best directions on how to gain the highest level of spiritual wisdom, why does not everyone accept his words as absolute truth, considering he said nothing negative? We live through our spirit, but we must first subdue the dominance of our subconscious mind. We must first be able to recognize our inner spirit and the division between the subconscious mind and how we perceive everything. Only then can we see reality on reality's terms. Only then can we gain higher consciousness, and only then can we find the common ground. Vast majority of people who consider themselves to be religious have become the lost sheep. This is because they have accepted others' perceptions instead of seeking their own absolute truth within spirit. Now, when I say this, it's not because I believe my perception is superior to others. I believe my perception is equal to everybody else's. Now, when I look from a moving forward perspective, what I do know with my whole entire being is that in order for all of us to find out the absolute truth, we must first look inward. We must first find all the good that has taken place within our own personal existence and let go of all the negative that has taken place. Because truly within spirit, there is no negative. Negative is not real. Negative is strictly our own perceptions of our interactions within our existence. Now, by no means do I believe that I am above anybody else, and for that matter, by no means do I feel that I'm below anybody else. I believe we are all equal, living our own self-created illusion. But we do have the ability to rise above that. We do have the ability to connect with each other as one. But the only way we can do that is by letting go of our fear. You know, our fear that, oh, if I adopt this perspective versus hanging on to my prior subconscious perceptions, my illusion, then you might be wrong. But ask yourself, how can you possibly be wrong if you follow the words that aren't negative? You follow the words that truly tell us how to be a quality human being, how to have love for ourselves, how to have love for each other, and how to find the positive within all of existence. Anyways, I hope that this is able to bring the first question together and help you understand why I know that it's important to refer back to, religious doctrines, especially, the New Testament. And I do believe that it's important to know the New Testament before you try to understand the Old Testament. Also, I know with my whole being that if you will truly listen to specifically the words of Son of Man, his words act as mediation for us to find the absolute truth within all religious doctrines. All we have to do is have trust in the good within humanity, and realize that eventually all the negative, all the evil within humanity can go away if we are simply willing to first start by loving us. And that requires us to recognize the spirit within us and recognize that that is the only absolute truth within existence, and that is the true good within our life, whether it be our spiritual life or our physical life. We all have a choice, and all I am trying to do is help others find their own absolute truth. Now, I know when we narrow it down and we find our own personal, absolute truth, individual absolute truth, it will truly align with everybody else's. The only way we can do that is by not feeling sorry for ourselves, though, and not having selfish intent. Anyways, I hope this helps, and please ask any questions you could possibly have, because nobody can understand another person's perception if, when their subconscious mind starts getting caught up on something it doesn't understand or something it doesn't believe, because then the mind will become defensive, and it won't seek out truth because it feels threatened. And if I might leave you on this question with the truth, that the one thing that Son of Man said 365 times was telling us to have no fear. Our fear is coming from our subconscious mind. If we embrace our spirit and we truly feel the love that comes from our spirit, we'll truly get a clearer picture.